The dawn broke over the valley like a wound in the sky, blood-red and ominous. Smoke hung in the air from last night's fires, curling lazily over the rooftops of Millersville. It was a small town, quiet and unassuming, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your troubles. Today, however, the peaceful streets had transformed into a scene from a nightmare. In the distance, a thunderous growl rolled over the hills, shaking the earth beneath. 35 tanks, armored and unstoppable, rumbled toward the town like a steel avalanche. The soldiers inside them were merciless, trained for one purpose: obliteration. Sirens blared, and civilians scattered like startled animals. Mothers grabbed children, dragging them through smoke-choked streets, while elderly men stumbled, coughing, trying to escape the advancing nightmare. Cars skidded off roads, engines screaming, as panic spread faster than fire. Windows shattered from the concussive blasts of the first artillery rounds, sending shards of glass slicing through the air. The valley, normally serene and sleepy, had become a war zone overnight. Atop a ruined overpass, crouched against the cold steel railing, stood Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe. Her uniform was streaked with dirt and soot, her hair tangled and damp with sweat. She was young, 27, but her eyes held the kind of calm intensity only forged in fire. Every instinct honed through years of combat now screamed at her: focus, calculate, survive. The tanks weren't just moving, they were hunting. And she was the prey, or maybe the hunter. She wasn't sure which yet, but she knew one thing. She was the only line of defense between Millersville and total annihilation. Her gaze swept the valley, noting each glint of sun on steel, each movement of the monstrous machines. The first tank crested the hill, its turret swinging lazily, scanning for threats. Eliza's hand rested on the grip of her weapon, cold and steady. Her fingers tightened around the trigger, her mind calculating angles, distances, blast radii. She muttered under her breath, almost to herself, "One shot, one chance." The radio crackled to life behind her, static cutting through the tense morning. "Captain Monroe, it's hopeless. There's too many, we can't." She cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Not today, not today." Her voice was calm, almost eerily so, but her eyes burned with a fire no one could ignore. She pressed forward, moving over the shattered concrete like a ghost, invisible yet lethal. The first explosion ripped through the valley. The lead tank shuddered and erupted in flames, sending a column of smoke twisting into the sky like a black ribbon. Civilians froze mid-step, staring in disbelief. Behind her, a young soldier whispered, voice trembling, How did she?" Eliza didn't answer. She had no time. Every second mattered. She darted between ruins, setting mines with a precision that made her movements almost dance-like. Her training in demolition, sniping, and close combat all fused into a single, lethal choreography. Each tank that roared over the hills was met with fire, metal twisting, engines screaming as steel giants toppled one by one. But even as she struck, a cold realization settled in her stomach. The army wasn't retreating. They weren't panicked. They were adapting. Every tank that fell was replaced by another, more calculated, more aggressive. Somewhere in the ranks, a commander was learning her tactics, predicting her movements. That meant every step she took, every explosive she planted could be anticipated. The overpass shook violently as another tank fired, shell whistling overhead. Eliza rolled to the side, grit and dust filling her mouth. A window shattered behind her, showering concrete fragments onto the road. She forced herself up, ignoring the burn in her lungs, the ache in her muscles. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for weaknesses. There, the bridge ahead, partially collapsed but just strong enough to support the weight of one armored vehicle at a time. And there, a ridge, high and jagged, perfect for an ambush. She moved with silent purpose, each step calculated, each breath measured. In her mind, she replayed the assault over and over, visualizing every tank, every turret, every trajectory. The valley was a chessboard, and she was 3 moves ahead of a ruthless opponent who didn't even know her name yet. The first of the enemy's elite units appeared, faster, deadlier than the rest. Their tanks were reinforced, equipped with cutting-edge targeting systems, and their crews had been trained for exactly one scenario: eliminating lone defenders. Eliza felt a ripple of tension tighten around her heart. One miscalculation could mean the end, not just for her, but for every soul in Millersville. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she drew a deep, steadying breath, letting the adrenaline sharpen her senses. Through the haze of smoke and dust, she spotted civilians cowering behind a crumbled wall. Their eyes were wide, reflecting both terror and awe. For a brief, fleeting moment, she allowed herself a pang of emotion, anger, desperation, and a fierce need to protect. Then she shoved it down, focusing instead on the immediate threat. Every tank destroyed, every mine detonated, was one step closer to keeping them alive. Suddenly, the first tank on the ridge exploded. Flames licked the sky, black smoke spiraling upward, sending birds fleeing from the trees. Eliza ducked as shrapnel rained down, fragments embedding in the concrete around her. She moved again, faster now, placing explosives with a surgeon's precision. Each step, each action was choreographed against death itself. The radio crackled again, frantic voices filled with fear. "Captain, they're splitting into two columns. We can't hold them." Eliza's jaw tightened. "Then I'll hold them," she whispered, almost to herself. She pressed forward, heart hammering, fingers raw from the friction of constant movement. The first tank of the second column emerged over the horizon, massive and menacing. She adjusted her sights, breath steadying, pulse syncing with the rhythm of the battlefield. And then it happened, the first shot fired, and the entire world seemed to pause. The tank shuddered, smoke billowing from its engine. Civilians peeked from behind broken walls, eyes wide with disbelief. But the sound of another approaching engine snapped her back to reality. She was alone. 34 tanks remained, and the commander, somewhere in the chaos, was watching, waiting, learning. Eliza's lips curled into a determined, grim smile. The valley stretched out before her, a chaotic tableau of fire, steel, and desperation. Her mind raced, plotting, anticipating. Every sense screamed for her to move, to strike, to survive. Her fingers tightened around the detonator, and she whispered, almost as a prayer, "Not today, not in my town." The lead tank roared again, turrets swinging, engines growling like a beast smelling blood. Eliza's eyes narrowed, and in that instant the world seemed to hold its breath. She leapt from the overpass, landing in a cloud of dust and shattered concrete, her body moving faster than thought. Somewhere ahead, steel giants waited. Somewhere behind, civilians prayed. Somewhere above, smoke twisted into the sky, marking the beginning of a battle that no one would forget. And in that moment, as the first shells screamed past, the ground trembling beneath her boots, she knew one thing with perfect clarity. Today, one woman stood between Millersville and annihilation. And she was ready. The first tank of the column fired again, and everything changed. The roar of the next tank reverberated through the valley, shaking the remnants of the overpass where Eliza had just leapt. Dust and debris clung to her skin like a second layer, and her lungs burned with each ragged inhale. The first tank lay smoldering behind her, a monument to her skill and courage, yet the remainder of the armored column pressed forward, unstoppable, merciless. 34 machines of war, each one a rolling fortress of steel and fire, hungrily closing in on Millersville. Eliza's boots hit the cracked asphalt as she moved between ruined buildings, her eyes scanning every corner. Civilians huddled behind shattered walls, clutching frightened children. Mothers whispered frantic prayers, old men muttered curses against the invading army, and somewhere in the background, the radio crackled with panicked soldiers reporting casualties. She had no time to console anyone. Her job wasn't to comfort, it was to survive and defend. One misstep now would mean the end of everything she loved. She ducked behind the remnants of a bombed-out car, smoke curling around her like a ghostly veil. From here, she could see the second tank of the main column, its turrets swinging with deadly precision. Its crew had clearly learned from the destruction of their lead unit. They weren't making the same mistake twice. Eliza's pulse quickened, but her mind remained a razor-sharp instrument of calculation. Timing, angle, distance, velocity, every detail mattered. She had to anticipate their every move before they anticipated hers. With meticulous care, she planted mines along the narrow street leading into the valley. Each mine was positioned for maximum effect, capable of crippling a tank's treads or causing catastrophic chain reactions. She could hear the faint hiss of hydraulics and the crunch of metal as the tanks adjusted their formation, responding to her previous attack. One soldier whispered in awe, almost incoherently, She's not human." Eliza didn't smile. There was no room for pride here. Every tank destroyed only heightened the danger. They were adapting, learning, analyzing. Somewhere in the command chain, a tactical genius was piecing together her strategy, predicting her moves, planning their counterattack. And she knew, without doubt, that when that counter came, it would be lethal. A deafening roar split the morning air as the second tank fired, shells exploding against the ruined streets. Shrapnel rained down, slicing through metal and masonry, embedding itself in the walls, the ground, even the scorched trees lining the road. Eliza rolled behind a fallen beam, dust choking her, ears ringing. Her vision cleared just in time to see a civilian trapped under rubble, crying out for help. For a moment, the human instinct to save overtook her tactical calculation. She sprinted, lifting the debris just enough for the person to crawl free. The woman collapsed, clutching her child, eyes wide with terror and gratitude. Eliza offered a tight, fleeting smile, then moved again. There was no time to linger, every second counted, and each passing second brought the armored army closer. She spotted a small alley between two bombed-out warehouses. It was narrow, risky, but perfect for an ambush. Ducking into the shadows, she positioned herself with painstaking precision. One tank, she calculated, would enter the alley last, slowed by the rubble. If she timed it perfectly, a single shot would trigger a chain of destruction. Her hands worked with surgical skill, planting explosives, adjusting detonation sequences. She could almost hear the metallic heartbeat of the tanks, counting down to her strike. Then a shadow moved at the edge of her vision. She froze, pulse hammering. The enemy had sent an elite squad ahead, a small, mobile detachment designed to flush out threats like her. Her eyes narrowed, assessing their speed and formation. There was no way to outrun them. Her only option was to strike first, decisively, and survive the chaos that followed. With a sharp exhale, she triggered the explosives. Flames roared, steel twisted and groaned under the sudden fury. Two tanks toppled in a synchronized collapse, smoke and fire rising like angry pillars toward the sky. The elite squad scrambled, panic etched on their faces as they tried to flee the collapsing alley. Eliza moved like a phantom, darting through dust and flame, each motion calculated, each heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of destruction. The victory was fleeting. Over the horizon, she noticed the column splitting into two separate formations, flanking the town from multiple directions. Her stomach tightened. The enemy had anticipated the ambush. They weren't just adapting, they were learning, evolving, and her position, though deadly, was now known. She ducked into another ruined building, listening as engines and treads crunched over rubble, closing in from both sides. Her hands were blistered, her arms trembling with exhaustion, but she refused to give in. She moved to the roof, scanning the battlefield from above. Every tank, every soldier, every piece of cover was accounted for. She calculated angles, distances, timing, each thought a lifeline. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind raced ahead, orchestrating destruction in her head before it happened in reality. The radio crackled again. The voices were desperate, fragmented. "Captain, they're everywhere, you can't hold." Eliza cut it off. "Watch me." Her voice was calm, unwavering, filled with a cold fire. She didn't just mean she would fight, she meant she would win. She dove from the roof, landing in a cloud of dust and debris, rolling to absorb the impact. The remaining tanks roared like monsters, their cannons swiveling to track her movements. She sprinted across the open street, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding her system. She ducked behind a wall just as a shell slammed into the ground where she had been a heartbeat ago, sending concrete fragments spraying in every direction. Her mind raced. 34 tanks remained, each one deadly, each one a fortress. One wrong move and Millersville would be nothing but fire and ash. She had already destroyed 24 tanks, but the enemy's adaptation was terrifying. They were faster, smarter, more relentless than she had ever faced, and yet in the chaos she felt a cold thrill. This was the fight she had trained for, the moment she had imagined countless times in drills and simulations. Survival wasn't enough, she had to dominate. She spotted another choke point ahead, a narrow bridge over a dry riverbed. It was risky, barely stable under the weight of one tank, but if she could lure them there, she could set another chain of explosions, taking out multiple tanks at once. She moved cautiously, whispering calculations to herself, distances, angles, timing. One wrong step would trigger disaster. As she reached the bridge, she heard a low, menacing growl, the sound of the elite commander's personal tank approaching. This was the brain of the operation, the one orchestrating the destruction, and it had spotted her. Its turrets swiveled slowly, methodically, targeting her with surgical precision. Eliza swallowed, heart hammering, as the realization hit. She had only one chance to strike. One miscalculation, one hesitation, and the entire town would be obliterated. She tightened her grip on the detonator, feeling the cold metal against her palm, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. She glanced back at the valley below, at the civilians huddled behind ruined buildings, at the streets littered with twisted steel and shattered dreams. Her jaw set. She was the only thing standing between them and total annihilation. The elite commander's tank advanced, slow but unstoppable, like a predator circling its prey. Eliza took a deep breath, calculating, anticipating. The moment stretched, elongated, every second a lifetime. Then, as the lead tank reached the center of the bridge, she triggered the explosives. The world exploded in fire and sound. Concrete, steel, and smoke surged upward like a volcanic eruption. Tanks toppled into the riverbed, engines screaming as they fell. Flames danced across the bridge, and the commander's tank shuddered violently, caught in the blast's epicenter. Eliza rolled to the side, coughing, her ears ringing. Smoke burned her lungs, ash clinging to her skin. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself a heartbeat of triumph. She had done it. She had destroyed multiple tanks at once, crippled the enemy's strategy, and kept the town alive. But the moment was shattered by a new sound. A faint, distant rumble, deeper, heavier, more menacing than any tank she had faced. She froze, chest tightening. Somewhere beyond the smoke and fire, the armored army was still advancing. Reinforcements were coming. Eliza's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. 34 tanks had survived the morning assault. And now, she realized with a sinking chill, they were preparing for a counterattack. Smarter, deadlier, and focused entirely on her. She pressed the detonator to her chest, feeling the cold steel against her skin. "Not today," she whispered, voice raw with determination. "Not in my town." The rumble grew louder, closer. The valley shivered. The next wave was coming. And in that moment, as smoke and fire twisted across the horizon, Eliza knew the fight was far from over. By midday, the valley had transformed into a hellscape of fire, smoke, and twisted metal. The streets of Millersville were littered with remnants of shattered tanks, crumpled vehicles, and rubble from destroyed buildings. Civilians huddled behind walls and overturned cars, eyes wide with a mix of terror and awe. And above it all, a lone figure moved like a force of nature, Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with soot and sweat, yet her eyes burned with an unrelenting focus. 30 tanks lay destroyed behind her, yet the remainder of the armored column advanced relentlessly. Each explosion she had orchestrated had been a temporary victory. The enemy adapted with frightening speed. They had split their forces into 2 columns, attempting to flank the town and encircle her. Somewhere within their ranks, a tactical genius was studying her every move, learning, predicting, and preparing a deadly counter. Eliza crouched in the shadows of a collapsed warehouse, scanning the advancing steel beasts. Her mind raced, calculating distances, blast radii, angles of attack. Every move, every breath, every heartbeat mattered. She could feel the valley trembling beneath the rumble of approaching tanks. Civilians peeked from hiding spots, holding their breath, hoping the lone woman defending their town could hold the line. She could hear the mechanical growls of the tank's engines, the hydraulic hiss of their turrets, the clank of massive treads crushing anything in their path. Each sound was a warning, each vibration a reminder of the stakes. Her pulse synced with the rhythm of the battlefield, every nerve on high alert. She moved carefully, placing mines with surgical precision, her hands blistered, her muscles screaming with fatigue, yet her mind razor-sharp. Suddenly, movement at the edge of her vision. A pair of elite tanks, faster and deadlier than the rest, were advancing in a flanking maneuver. Their crews had clearly learned from previous ambushes, and their targeting systems were more precise, almost surgical. She could see the commanders inside, faces obscured by visors, their focus unwavering. They were predators, trained to eliminate threats like her. One misstep would mean her death and the annihilation of Millersville. Eliza took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had no time for hesitation. The alley she was moving toward offered a risky advantage, a narrow choke point, partially collapsed but perfect for an ambush. She ducked behind a ruined wall, positioning herself strategically. One wrong move, and the elite tanks would crush her instantly. She gritted her teeth, planting explosives with meticulous precision, her fingers trembling from exhaustion but guided by years of training. The lead elite tank advanced, its turret sweeping slowly, methodically, scanning for threats. Its targeting system locked onto her hiding spot. She swallowed, heart hammering, as a shell slammed into the wall beside her, sending concrete shards flying like deadly needles. The blast rattled her teeth, but she remained focused. Survival wasn't enough. She had to dominate, to ensure the enemy never recovered. She triggered the explosives. The alley erupted in fire and steel. The two elite tanks shuddered, twisted, and toppled in a synchronized collapse, engines screaming until they were silenced. Smoke rose in thick black clouds, carrying the acrid stench of burning fuel and melted metal. Soldiers scrambling to escape the rubble were thrown off balance, their movements frantic and panicked. Eliza didn't pause to revel in her success. She moved again, sprinting across open ground toward a narrow bridge spanning a dry riverbed, a precarious structure, barely holding under the weight of a single tank. If she could lure the enemy's next wave there, she could trigger a chain reaction, taking out multiple tanks at once. Timing was everything. One miscalculation, and she and the civilians would be crushed under 35 tons of steel. The lead tank of the second column rumbled onto the bridge, massive and menacing. Its turrets swiveled, searching, hunting. Eliza ducked into a nearby ruined building, calculating the perfect moment. Her hands worked furiously, adjusting detonators and timing devices. She could feel the valley vibrating beneath the advancing steel, each movement a countdown to destruction. Then came the sound she had dreaded most, the low, menacing growl of the commander's personal tank. Unlike the others, it moved with uncanny precision, its crew disciplined and lethal. This was the brain of the enemy force, the orchestrator of destruction, and it had spotted her. Its turrets swiveled slowly, locking onto her position with calculated intent. She could almost feel the eyes behind the visor, watching, waiting, predicting. Her pulse quickened. She had destroyed so many tanks, yet the commander remained, a looming threat, patient and intelligent. Civilians watched from broken windows, holding their breath as she readied herself for the next strike. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with soot and blood from minor injuries sustained in the explosions. Her arms trembled with fatigue, but she forced herself to remain still, focused, poised like a predator preparing to strike. The bridge creaked under the weight of the approaching tanks. Eliza's calculations ran like clockwork in her mind. Distances, angles, timing, chain reactions. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the entire town would be obliterated. She adjusted the explosives, ensuring maximum impact, then dove behind a pile of rubble, heart hammering in her chest. The first tank reached the center of the bridge. She pressed the detonator. The world erupted in a deafening roar. Concrete, steel, and fire surged upward in a violent explosion. The bridge buckled, snapping under the force, and the lead tank toppled into the dry riverbed, smoke and fire consuming it instantly. The second tank, caught in the blast radius, shuddered violently, its engine screaming as treads twisted and broke. The commander's tank shuddered at the edge of the destruction, but it didn't fall. It had survived, calculating, observing, waiting. Eliza rolled to the side, coughing, ash filling her lungs, ears ringing from the deafening blast. She had won the first part of the battle, but the victory was temporary. The remaining tanks were still advancing, adapting, learning. Her body screamed with exhaustion, every muscle aching, but she forced herself to move. Survival wasn't enough. She had to remain a step ahead. Civilians peeked from hiding spots, eyes wide, whispering prayers and murmuring her name. Mothers clutched children tightly, while old men muttered blessings under their breath. Eliza allowed herself a fleeting glance, a heartbeat of connection, before focusing on the task at hand. Every second she hesitated could cost lives. She noticed the enemy's formations adjusting, smarter, more aggressive. Her mind raced, plotting the next ambush, the next trap, the next strike. The commander's tank, the last obstacle between her and Millersville, had not been defeated. It moved with methodical patience, its engines rumbling like a predator stalking prey. Eliza's fingers tightened around the detonator, her knuckles white. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the roar of engines and explosions, "Not today, not in my town." Her gaze swept the valley, noting every civilian hiding, every tank advancing, every shadow that could conceal danger. The stakes were clear. Fail, and Millersville would be nothing but fire, smoke, and ashes. She glanced toward the ridge that overlooked the valley, a perfect vantage point for her next maneuver. If she could reach it undetected, she could control the battlefield, turning every tank into a target. But the elite commander was clever. It had likely anticipated this move. Her pulse thundered as she weighed her options. One misstep, and she would be crushed under the sheer force of 34 tanks still advancing relentlessly. The wind carried the faintest sound of artillery from beyond the hills, distant but unmistakable. Reinforcements. Another wave. She didn't know, and she couldn't afford to wait to find out. Every second was precious. With a deep, steadying breath, she began her ascent toward the ridge, moving like a shadow, ghosting between cover, every movement deliberate, every heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the approaching steel monsters. And then she heard it, a faint click, almost imperceptible over the roar of engines. She froze, heart hammering. Somewhere close, a tank had stopped, turrets swiveling toward her, crew alert, weapons locked. The commander had anticipated her move, and she was now a target. Eliza's eyes narrowed, mind racing. She had been hunting before, but now she was the prey, and the hunter was intelligent, patient, lethal. Her fingers tightened around the detonator. She knew what had to be done. The next move would decide the fate of Millersville, her life, and the lives of everyone she had sworn to protect. The world seemed to hold its breath as she readied herself for the next strike. The commander's tank roared, advancing again, slow and inevitable, a steel colossus stalking its quarry. Eliza whispered to herself, her voice steel and fire, "Not today." And with that she stepped into the unknown. The valley trembled beneath the relentless march of steel. Smoke and fire twisted into the sky like black banners of war. Eliza crouched atop a crumbling overpass, her eyes locked on the commander's tank, the hulking fortress that had survived every trap she had set. 33 tanks still advanced behind it, engines growling, treads grinding over debris, their cannons sweeping the horizon in lethal synchronization. Every second, every decision mattered. One mistake could crush Millersville beneath 35 tons of metal, obliterating homes, lives, and hope. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Blisters tore at her hands, muscles burned, and her lungs ached from inhaling smoke and ash. Yet fatigue was a luxury she could not afford. She adjusted the detonator strapped to her wrist, every movement precise despite the tremor coursing through her. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, mapping every possible route, every vulnerability, every potential ambush point. Civilians peeked from the ruins of their homes, awe and terror reflected in their faces. She was their only line of defense, and she felt the weight of that responsibility crushing her chest. The commander's tank moved forward with unnerving deliberation. Unlike the others, it didn't rush. It calculated, stalking her like a predator stalking prey. Its turret swiveled slowly, scanning the valley, searching, anticipating. Eliza's heart pounded in time with the mechanical growl, every beat a warning of the impending confrontation. She knew the tank's crew were skilled, perhaps the best in the army, trained specifically for one task, hunting her down and crushing any opposition. Eliza ducked into the ruins of a warehouse, debris cascading around her feet as another shell slammed into the overpass she had just vacated. Smoke filled the air, stinging her eyes and throat. She coughed, forcing herself to focus. Time had slowed. Every sound was amplified, the distant whine of tank engines, the snap of debris under treads, the terrified whispers of civilians hiding below. She mapped the terrain in her mind. A narrow alley partially collapsed, leading to a small ridge overlooking the valley. If she could reach it undetected, she could control the battlefield. Every tank would become vulnerable, every movement predictable. But the commander's tank was already moving to intercept her. It was clever, cunning, and deadly. One misstep and the town would be lost. Eliza's mind raced through every possibility, every tactical maneuver she had learned, every survival instinct honed through years of combat. She would have to strike first, strike decisively, and disappear before the enemy could respond. With a deep breath, she darted across the open street, rolling under a fragment of concrete as a shell exploded just inches away, sending shards of stone and metal flying like deadly hail. The civilians below gasped, clutching their children tightly, whispering desperate prayers. Eliza felt the surge of emotion, the responsibility weighing heavier than ever. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Survival wasn't enough. She had to win. The enemy was learning, adapting, and patience was their weapon. Her own patience, her own skill would have to surpass theirs. She reached the alley, narrow and twisted, littered with debris. It was a perfect trap. If she timed it correctly, the approaching tanks would be funneled into a choke point, where explosives she had planted days before could trigger a chain reaction of destruction. She moved swiftly, planting charges, wiring them carefully, checking distances, adjusting timing sequences. Her hands were bleeding, muscles trembling, but precision was all that mattered now. The commander's tank appeared at the edge of the street, massive and menacing. Its turret tracked her movements, sensors glowing faintly in the dust-choked sunlight. Behind it, the remaining tanks adjusted their formation, spreading out to flank the alley. Eliza's stomach tightened. This was the moment she had been waiting for and dreading. She pressed herself against the rubble, heart hammering, breath shallow, eyes narrowing. Timing was everything. One miscalculation and the entire town, every life within it, would be destroyed. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "Not today, not in my town." The first tank entered the alley, slow, deliberate, its massive treads crushing debris underfoot. Eliza's fingers tightened around the detonator. The second tank followed, engines growling, turrets swiveling to scan for threats. She held her breath, counting the distance, calculating angles, waiting for the perfect moment. And then she triggered the explosives. The alley erupted in a deafening roar. Fire and smoke shot skyward, concrete and steel twisted and crumbled. The first tank shuddered violently, flames consuming its engine, sending it tumbling sideways. The second tank shuddered under the blast, treads snapping as it was thrown off balance, fire licking its sides. Soldiers scrambled in confusion, trapped in a collapsing nightmare of their own making. Eliza rolled from the rubble, coughing, eyes stinging from the acrid smoke. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she forced herself to rise. She had won the first part of the battle, but the fight was far from over. The commander's tank remained, a hulking, intelligent fortress of steel, watching, calculating. 33 tanks still advanced. Civilians clutched each other tightly, eyes wide, as if they could draw strength from her defiance. She scanned the battlefield, mind racing. Every remaining tank had survived, but they were wounded, slowed, and now more predictable. If she could control the high ground, she could dictate the pace of the battle, turning their own weight and momentum against them. But the commander was clever, anticipating every move, calculating every risk. One mistake could be fatal. Eliza's gaze shifted to the ridge overlooking the valley. It was jagged, partially destroyed, but it offered a clear view of the battlefield below. From there, she could plan her next ambush, strike the commander and potentially cripple the remaining tanks. But getting there would be dangerous. Open ground, minimal cover, and the commander's tank positioned to intercept. She crouched low, timing the enemy's movements. The lead tank advanced onto the street leading to the ridge, scanning for her. She darted forward, moving like a shadow, heart racing. A shell exploded nearby, sending a shower of concrete fragments over her, but she pressed on, weaving between cover, calculating every step. The commander's tank roared, turrets swiveling, engines growling like a beast sensing prey. Eliza ducked into a ruined doorway, pressing herself flat against the wall. Smoke filled her lungs, grit stung her eyes, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She had trained for moments like this. She had survived impossible odds before, and now she would do it again. Civilians peeked from broken windows, holding their breath. Soldiers whispered her name in awe, and above it all, the valley trembled with the approach of 33 tanks. The commander's eyes locked on her, waiting, patient, lethal. Eliza swallowed, heart pounding, fingers tightening around the detonator. She had no choice but to move forward. The ridge was the only way to control the battlefield, to have any chance of victory. She exhaled, whispered a single word, "Now." And she leapt into the unknown, sprinting toward the ridge, every sense heightened, every muscle coiled. Behind her, fire and smoke billowed, tanks roared, and the commander's presence loomed like a shadow over the valley. The moment stretched into eternity. Every step was a gamble, every breath a defiance of death. She had already taken down dozens of tanks, but the fight was far from over. And as the commander's tank shifted, preparing to block her ascent, Eliza realized one terrifying truth. This was no longer just a battle for Millersville. It was a battle for survival itself. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and dangerous. The ground shook with every tank approaching. She tightened her grip on the detonator. The commander's tank fired a shell, and the explosion threw her off balance. Dust and debris filled the air. Her heart raced. She rolled, pressed herself against the ridge, and looked up. 33 tanks remained. The commander's eyes, hidden behind visor and steel, watched, calculating, waiting. She drew in a ragged breath and whispered, almost to herself, "This ends today." And in that split second, the valley held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The valley burned beneath a relentless sun, the air thick with smoke and ash. 33 tanks still advanced, grinding over shattered streets, their engines growling like beasts stalking prey. Eliza Blaze Monroe crouched behind a ruined wall, sweat and soot streaked across her face, muscles screaming with exhaustion, yet her eyes burned with unyielding focus. The commander's tank, the colossal methodical predator, moved with terrifying precision, each tread a threat, each turret sweep a warning. Eliza's mind raced, calculating the impossible. Every step she had taken, every trap she had set had only delayed the inevitable. The commander was learning, observing, calculating. And now, with the remaining tanks approaching, she faced the most dangerous moment yet, the confrontation with the mastermind behind the destruction. The commander's tank emerged from the smoke like a living nightmare, massive and blackened, turrets swiveling with cold, clinical precision. Its sensors glowed faintly, scanning, calculating. Somewhere inside, the human mind orchestrating destruction had noticed her movements, had adapted. The elite crew had become a single, intelligent entity, a predator waiting for her to make the first move. Eliza pressed herself against the rubble, heart hammering. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but there was no room for weakness. Civilians peeked from broken windows, holding their breath, watching the lone woman standing between them and annihilation. Mothers clutched children, whispers of prayer carried on the wind, while old men muttered blessings under their breath. All eyes were on her, and every second of hesitation could be fatal. She rose slowly, calculating her approach. The ridge looming ahead offered vantage and cover. If she could reach it undetected, she could control the battlefield, targeting the commander and exploiting the remaining tanks' vulnerabilities. But moving across open ground with 33 tanks advancing and the commander watching was near suicidal. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat had to be precise. The ground quaked beneath her as the commander's tank advanced, treads crushing concrete and steel, a relentless force of metal and fire. Eliza sprinted from cover to cover, rolling behind walls and debris, dodging shells that screamed past her like death incarnate. One misstep, one delayed reaction, and the valley would be reduced to ash. Yet even in the face of such overwhelming odds, she remained a figure of cold determination, every motion guided by instinct and experience. Her eyes darted, scanning for weaknesses. The commander's tank, though formidable, was massive and slower on uneven ground. Its treads struggled over rubble-strewn streets, its turrets swiveling with calculated caution. Eliza's mind worked frantically, plotting angles, distances, and timing. She couldn't simply destroy it. She had to dismantle the heart of the army, neutralize its intelligence, and strike decisively. The valley echoed with the sound of artillery fire as other tanks moved to support the commander, engines screaming, cannons rotating. Soldiers shouted commands, their voices lost in the roar of destruction. The town's civilians cowered, eyes wide, as Eliza adjusted her grip on the detonator. She had seconds, maybe less, to act. She dove into a narrow alley leading to the ridge, weaving between debris and burning vehicles. The commander's tank adjusted, turrets swiveling, sensors scanning the alley. Its engines growled like a beast aware of its prey's movement. Her heart raced, every step a calculated gamble. Then she spotted it, a narrow bridge partially destroyed, leading directly to the ridge. If she could reach it, she could gain height and vantage, forcing the commander's tank to expose its weak points. The risk was monumental. One wrong move and the collapsing bridge could send her and the entire ridge into the valley below, crushed under the weight of enemy steel. Eliza sprinted toward the bridge, adrenaline surging, every sense heightened. She could hear the mechanical growl of the commander's tank behind her, every vibration of the ground a warning of its proximity. Civilians peeked from the ruins, their faces etched with fear and hope, silently urging her forward. She gritted her teeth, forcing exhaustion aside. Victory wasn't optional. Survival wasn't enough. She had to win. The bridge trembled beneath her feet as she reached its midpoint. She crouched, setting explosives along the weak points, wiring detonators with precise timing. Sweat and soot ran into her eyes, stinging, but she ignored it. Every second mattered. Every movement had to be perfect. The commander's tank had halted at the far end of the bridge, turrets swiveling, sensors scanning, aware of the potential trap. Eliza pressed herself against the steel beams, heart pounding, breath ragged. She could feel the heat of the commander's tank, smell the acrid smoke from its engines. The remaining tanks adjusted, flanking her position, attempting to force her into a kill zone. She whispered a prayer to herself, a fleeting moment of humanity before the storm. Then she leapt into action. She triggered the explosives on the bridge. The world erupted in fire, steel, and smoke. The bridge buckled violently, sending one of the supporting tanks toppling into the dry riverbed below. Flames roared skyward, consuming metal and debris, smoke curling like dark banners over the valley. Soldiers scrambled in confusion, their formations broken, their command disrupted. The commander's tank shuddered at the edge of the collapse but did not fall. It had anticipated the trap. Its sensors glowed, targeting recalculated. Eliza's heart sank for a brief moment. She had underestimated the intelligence of her foe. But she quickly recalibrated, adjusting her strategy. Survival wasn't enough. She had to force the commander into a vulnerable position, bait it, manipulate it, and strike decisively. She darted to the ridge, finding cover behind jagged rocks, crouching low, fingers tightening around her detonator. 33 tanks remained, the commander at the center of it all, and yet she felt a surge of cold determination. She had already destroyed countless tanks. She had delayed the advance. And now, with the high ground and a clear view, she had a chance to finish the confrontation. The commander's tank shifted, turrets swiveling, engines growling, sensors tracking her every move. It fired and a shell slammed into the ridge, sending debris cascading around her. Eliza pressed herself against the rock, grit in her teeth, eyes narrowing. She could feel the tank's presence like a living thing, calculating, watching, waiting. She analyzed the angles, timing, and trajectory. One shot could cripple the commander's tank if she targeted its exposed engine compartment, but doing so required precision, courage, and perfect timing. One miscalculation, one delayed reaction, and she would be crushed beneath its weight. Civilians' eyes were on her. Soldiers whispered her name, and for a brief moment she allowed herself a heartbeat of human emotion, a flicker of fear, hope, and fierce determination. Eliza adjusted her aim, calculating wind, distance, and movement. She pressed the trigger. The shell streaked across the valley, a precise, deadly missile. It struck the commander's tank's engine compartment. Flames erupted, metal groaning under stress. The tank shuddered violently, smoke and fire curling into the sky. Its treads buckled, grinding over rubble, attempting to stabilize. The elite crew inside scrambled, alarms blaring, but the damage was done. The remaining tanks faltered, hesitation rippling through the column. The commander's intelligence had been the glue holding the army together. With it compromised, their advance slowed, and their movements became predictable. Eliza allowed herself a breath, muscles trembling with adrenaline, but she didn't pause. The fight was far from over. From the ridge, she could see the devastation she had wrought, the ruined tanks, the burning streets, the terrified civilians. She felt a surge of grim satisfaction, but it was fleeting. 32 tanks remained, and the commander's tank, though crippled, was still alive, a formidable, intelligent predator that would not fall easily. She clenched her jaw, fingers tightening around the detonator. Civilians clutched their children, eyes wide as if drawing courage from her defiance. She whispered almost to herself, "This isn't over, not yet." And in that moment, as smoke and fire swirled across the valley, Eliza realized the truth. She was facing the greatest challenge of her life, the battle that would decide the fate of Millersville, the army, and herself. The commander's tank shifted again, engines growling, sensors glowing. 32 tanks still moved, steel giants ready to crush all resistance. Her heart thundered, pulse surging as she prepared for the next strike, the next maneuver, the next confrontation. She drew a ragged breath, whispered, "Not today," and stepped fully into the battlefield. The valley held its breath, waiting. The valley groaned under the relentless assault of metal and fire. Smoke swirled like dark rivers across the streets of Millersville, curling into the sky as if marking the battlefield with the scars of war. 32 tanks remained, engines growling, treads grinding over rubble, their turrets swiveling with deadly precision. And amidst it all, Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe crouched behind the jagged ridge, muscles screaming, lungs burning, heart pounding, but her mind sharper than steel. She had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The commander's tank, though crippled, had not fallen. Its crew remained alert, calculating, a living machine of lethal intelligence. Every movement she had made, every trap she had set had been anticipated. This was no longer a simple battle. It was a duel of wits and survival, and one wrong move would mean annihilation for the town, the civilians, and her own life. Eliza's eyes scanned the battlefield from the ridge. Smoke and fire painted the valley in surreal hues of orange, red, and black. Shattered tanks lay twisted across streets, remnants of her previous strikes, yet the majority of the enemy remained, a relentless wall of steel. Civilians peeked from broken windows, their faces etched with fear and hope, silently begging her to succeed. She felt the weight of every soul in the town pressing down on her shoulders, yet she could not hesitate. She had to strike. The commander's tank shifted, turrets swiveling, engines growling like a predator stalking prey. It had recovered from her previous assault and was now advancing with terrifying patience, calculating her moves. Behind it, the remaining tanks adjusted, their formations fluid and adaptive. The valley was a living chessboard, and she had to think 10 moves ahead or risk losing everything. Eliza crouched low, studying the terrain. The streets below were littered with debris, the narrow alleys offering potential choke points. Ahead, a partially destroyed bridge led to a ruined factory, the perfect place for an ambush. But the commander was clever. It would anticipate the trap. She had to use misdirection, deception, and speed to gain any advantage. Her mind raced through calculations, distances, angles, explosive yields. Every detail mattered. She moved, darting across open ground, boots skimming broken concrete. A tank fired, and the explosion sent a shower of debris over her, yet she rolled with precision, minimizing exposure. Her hands were raw, muscles trembling, lungs burning, but she pressed on. Every second, every movement could mean survival or death. She reached the alley, ducked into shadows, and set a series of explosives along the path leading to the bridge. Timing was critical. Too early and the commander's tank would adjust. Too late and she would be caught in the blast. Sweat ran down her face, stinging her eyes, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the mechanics of destruction. Then she spotted movement. A squad of elite soldiers had dismounted from a transport, flanking the bridge, attempting to intercept her. Her heart clenched. She couldn't allow them to block her path. With a flick of her wrist, she detonated a small charge, sending a wall of concrete and metal crashing down, creating chaos among the squad. They scrambled, firing blindly, but she had already vanished into the shadows, moving like a phantom. The bridge loomed ahead, fragile yet vital. She could see the commander's tank approaching from the far side, sensors glowing faintly, engines growling. She pressed herself against the rubble, calculating the timing for the explosives she had planted days before. Her fingers tightened around the detonator, pulse hammering. The entire battle now hinged on this moment. With a sharp exhale, she triggered the explosives. The bridge erupted in fire and twisted steel. One of the supporting tanks toppled into the riverbed below, while the commander's tank shuddered violently at the edge. Flames and smoke curled upward, filling the valley with a choking haze. Soldiers scrambled to regain control, but the chaos was complete. Eliza didn't pause. She darted across the bridge, vaulting over broken sections, landing in a cloud of dust and smoke. The commander's tank recovered, engine roaring, turret swiveling, sensors glowing. It had survived, but the momentary disruption had given her a critical window. She reached the ruined factory, crouching behind a collapsed wall, surveying the battlefield from a vantage point. Her mind raced, calculating her next moves. The remaining tanks were scattered, their formations disrupted. The commander's tank, though intelligent and adaptive, had to navigate through twisted debris, slowing its advance. She could use this to her advantage, forcing it into a kill zone where explosives could cripple it entirely. Suddenly, a shell slammed into the factory wall behind her, sending debris flying. She rolled, heart hammering, dust choking her lungs. The commander had tracked her, anticipating her position. She gritted her teeth, rising just enough to set another charge along the main entrance, wiring it for maximum impact. Every movement was calculated, every second critical. From the ridge, she could see civilians peeking from shattered windows, their eyes wide with fear and hope. Mothers clutched children, old men muttered blessings. She drew a ragged breath, steeling herself. She had to succeed. For them, for the town, for every soul depending on her. The commander's tank advanced again, slower now, carefully navigating the debris-strewn streets. Eliza pressed herself low, waiting for the perfect moment. Timing was everything. She could see the treads grinding over concrete, smoke curling from its engine, sensors locking onto her position. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "Not today." She triggered the explosives. The factory erupted in fire and metal. The commander's tank shuddered, caught in the blast radius, flames licking its sides. Soldiers scrambled to escape the inferno, but she had already vanished into the shadows, moving with precision and speed. The remaining tanks faltered, their advance slowed, formations disrupted. She allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, though her muscles screamed and her lungs burned. 31 tanks still remained, the commander's tank, though crippled, still alive and calculating. Eliza scanned the valley, mapping her next move. The ridge offered control, a vantage point to orchestrate further destruction. But she knew the commander was clever, anticipating her every step. One mistake could be fatal. Civilians watched silently, holding their breath, praying. Every second mattered, every decision was life or death. Her eyes locked on the remaining tanks. She whispered to herself, "This isn't over, not yet." The commander's tank shifted, engines growling, turrets swiveling. The hunt was far from finished. Eliza drew a deep, ragged breath, fingers tightening around the detonator. She had survived impossible odds, destroyed countless tanks, and saved the town so far. But the most dangerous part of the battle was ahead. The commander, intelligent and lethal, remained. 31 tanks still advanced, and the valley trembled beneath their weight. She glanced at the civilians, their eyes wide, their hope fragile yet unwavering. She drew strength from them, from the stakes, from the fire burning in her chest. She would not fail. She could not fail. Millersville depended on her. The commander's tank advanced again, a looming shadow of steel and destruction. Eliza adjusted her aim, calculated distances, timing, angles. One strike could cripple it entirely. One mistake could mean annihilation. She whispered almost to herself, "Not today," and prepared for the next decisive strike. And in that instant, as the valley held its breath, smoke curling into the sky and fire lighting the streets like hellish lanterns, Eliza knew that everything, the town, the tanks, the battle, would be decided by the next moments of courage, precision, and sheer will. The ground trembled, the commander's sensors glowed, 31 tanks still moved, and the final confrontation was imminent. The valley was a living inferno. Smoke and fire rose in twisted columns, casting the streets in shades of orange and black. 31 tanks still advanced, their treads grinding over debris, cannons sweeping the horizon, engines growling like beasts. Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe crouched behind a crumbling wall atop the ridge. Sweat and soot streaked across her face, lungs burning, muscles trembling. But her mind was sharper than ever. She had survived impossible odds, but the greatest challenge remained. The commander's tank, a colossal predator of steel and fire, still lived. Her eyes tracked the remaining tanks as they adjusted formations, responding to every explosion, every trap she had set. The commander's tank led the advance, crippled but calculating, a mechanical monster with a lethal human mind inside. Its sensors glowed faintly, sweeping the valley, anticipating her every move. Eliza's pulse thundered, every nerve on high alert. One mistake would mean total annihilation. She swallowed, forcing herself to focus. Civilians peered from broken windows, clutching children, whispering desperate prayers. Mothers' voices trembled, old men muttered blessings, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked nervously. The entire town's hope rested on her shoulders. She could feel their fear and their trust like a tangible weight pressing down on her chest, spurring her forward. Eliza moved silently across the ridge, ducking behind rubble, surveying her surroundings. She had a vantage point. She could see the valley below, every tank, every soldier, every piece of cover. The commander's tank was approaching, its treads tearing over twisted concrete, turrets swiveling with patient precision. 31 tanks remained, but their movements were now predictable, slowed, hesitant after the chaos she had wrought. She had one chance, one perfect strike. If she could disable the commander, destroy the remaining tanks, and manipulate the battlefield, Millersville might survive. She pulled out a compact detonator, wiring charges with meticulous precision along a narrow bridge leading to a ruined overpass. Her hands were raw, blistered, muscles trembling, yet every movement was precise. Every second counted. A shell exploded nearby, sending fragments of concrete and metal spraying through the air. She rolled, barely avoiding the deadly shards, and pressed herself flat against a crumbling wall. The commander's tank had tracked her position, anticipating her movements. Her heart raced, adrenaline flooding her system. Every sense was on high alert. She could hear the engines, the treads grinding, the roar of distant explosions. Eliza ducked low, whispering to herself, "Not today." She had survived so much, yet she knew the next few minutes would decide everything. The commander's tank advanced, cautious but relentless, leading the remaining 29 tanks into her trap. She adjusted timing, wiring additional explosives to trigger in sequence. Precision would determine victory or death. From the ridge, she could see the civilians watching silently, hopping, praying. Their lives were in her hands. She felt a surge of determination, letting go of fear, embracing the cold focus of a soldier who had nothing left to lose. She was alone, but she was the only thing standing between Millersville and annihilation. The lead tank of the enemy column crossed the bridge, treads creaking, engines growling. Eliza pressed the detonator, setting off the first wave of explosives. The bridge buckled violently, flames and smoke erupting skyward. One tank toppled into the dry riverbed below, metal twisting, engines screaming. Soldiers scrambled in chaos, trying to regain control, but the blast had broken their formation. The commander's tank shuddered, caught in the peripheral effects of the explosion but refusing to fall. Its sensors glowed, recalculating, targeting her position with deadly precision. Eliza rolled, sliding into the shadow of a ruined building. She had anticipated its resilience. Survival wasn't enough. She had to strike decisively. She scanned the battlefield. The remaining tanks faltered, confusion spreading through the ranks. Their coordination was shattered. The commander was calculating its next move, but the valley now belonged to her. Every step she had taken had been deliberate, every trap carefully placed. The battlefield was hers to manipulate, but she had to act quickly. Eliza darted across open ground, sprinting toward another choke point. The commander's tank shifted, turrets swiveling, sensors tracking. A shell exploded where she had been a heartbeat ago, sending a shockwave through her body. Pain seared through her side, but she pressed on. She had no time to falter. The fate of Millersville hung in the balance. She reached a ruined factory, crouching behind twisted metal. From this vantage, she could control the valley, manipulate the remaining tanks, and force the commander into a trap. She adjusted the final sequence of explosives, wiring charges with precision. Every detail mattered: timing, distance, angle, blast radius. She was orchestrating destruction like a conductor leading a symphony of fire and steel. The commander's tank advanced cautiously, aware of the trap, calculating risk. Eliza's pulse raced as she waited for the perfect moment. Then she triggered the explosives. Flames and smoke erupted, metal twisted and groaned. 2 tanks toppled into the valley below, engines screaming, crews scrambling to escape. The remaining tanks faltered, unsure of the next move. The commander's tank, though crippled, continued to advance, a relentless predator stalking its prey. Eliza pressed herself against the rubble, sweat and soot blinding her, heart hammering. She had one shot left, one decisive strike to end the nightmare. She adjusted her aim, calculating angles, distances, and timing. From the ridge, she could see the chaos she had wrought: burning tanks, twisted metal, scattered soldiers, terrified civilians peeking from shattered windows. She allowed herself a fleeting heartbeat of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. 31 tanks remained, and the commander, though weakened, was still alive. Eliza gritted her teeth, focusing every ounce of energy on the final move. She couldn't fail. She couldn't hesitate. One miscalculation, one delayed reaction, and everything would be lost. She pressed the trigger, sending a precise shell streaking across the valley. The shell struck the commander's tank's engine compartment. Flames erupted, smoke curling skyward. The tank shuddered violently, treads snapping, sensors offline. The elite crew inside scrambled, but the damage was fatal. The predator had fallen. The remaining tanks faltered, chaos spreading through the ranks. Eliza didn't pause. She moved quickly, triggering additional explosives she had wired along strategic points. Metal twisted, engines screamed, and one by one the armored column fell into ruin. The valley was filled with smoke, fire, and the groaning of dying machines. Silence followed, punctuated only by the distant crackle of flames. Eliza sank to her knees, exhaustion overwhelming her. She had done it. Against impossible odds, against a superior force, she had saved Millersville. But even in victory, the adrenaline didn't fade. Civilians emerged from hiding, eyes wide, faces etched with awe and disbelief. Mothers clutched children, old men whispered blessings, soldiers approached cautiously. And above all, Eliza remained, breathing hard, battered but unbroken, the lone figure who had faced 35 tanks and lived. She surveyed the battlefield, smoke curling around her like a living entity. Every trap, every explosion, every calculated strike had worked. Millersville was safe, for now. But the valley bore scars of war, reminders of the destruction she had prevented. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart, and whispered almost to herself, "It's over for now." Yet even as she sank into exhaustion, a faint rumble in the distance reminded her, danger could return at any moment. The valley had survived, but the memory of steel, fire, and smoke would linger forever. And somewhere deep inside, Eliza knew that she would rise again if needed. The smoke over Millersville hung like a gray curtain, drifting slowly across streets scarred by fire and steel. The valley was silent, save for the occasional hiss of burning engines and the groan of twisted metal settling into rubble. 35 tanks had entered the town, 35 armored beasts that had threatened to obliterate everything in their path. And now, only silence remained. Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe crouched amid the ruins, muscles trembling, lungs aching, eyes stinging from smoke and sweat, but alive. She had done the impossible. Around her, the town emerged from hiding. Mothers clutched children tightly, tears streaking soot-covered faces. Old men whispered blessings under trembling breaths, their eyes wide in awe. Soldiers and surviving civilians alike moved cautiously among the wreckage, glancing at twisted metal and scorched streets, every step tentative as if the destruction itself might still spring to life. And in the midst of it all, Eliza remained, a lone figure who had faced 35 tanks and won. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Every muscle ached, every joint protested, but the fire in her chest burned brighter than fatigue. She had endured impossible odds, fought against overwhelming power, and outwitted the deadliest tactical mind in the enemy army. And yet she could not allow herself to rest, not completely. Millersville had survived, but the valley bore the scars of war. Every street, every building, every broken piece of metal told a story of destruction narrowly avoided. She moved through the ruins, helping civilians to their feet, guiding them past unstable rubble. Their gratitude was palpable, their awe almost overwhelming, yet she kept moving. This was not the time to celebrate. Victory had been achieved through precision, courage, and relentless focus, but the consequences of the battle lingered. The valley would take years to heal, and the memories would linger even longer. Eliza paused atop a small rise overlooking the battlefield. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the valley, painting the destruction in fiery gold and deep black. Tanks lay twisted and smoldering, their engines silent. Craters from explosions pocked the streets, and scattered supplies and personal belongings of soldiers and civilians alike littered the ground. And yet, amidst the ruin, life persisted. Children clung to mothers, dogs barked cautiously, and the faint sound of a single church bell echoed in the distance, a signal of resilience. She allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. The commander's tank, the hulking predator that had orchestrated the invasion, lay disabled, engine smoldering, turret mangled. Its crew had survived in shock, scattered among the wreckage. 34 other tanks had been reduced to twisted metal, some toppled into the dry riverbed, others shattered beyond recognition. Millersville had survived against impossible odds, and she had been the spear, the shield, and the brain of the defense. The adrenaline still surged through her veins, making exhaustion feel distant. She allowed herself a deep breath, savoring the rare moment of quiet amid chaos. For years, she had trained for this. The impossible, the life-or-death scenarios, the moments when failure meant obliteration. But no training could have fully prepared her for the emotional weight of what she had done. The lives she had saved, the destruction she had averted, the responsibility she had carried, it was immense. Civilians began to emerge more fully from their hiding places, gathering in small groups to survey the aftermath. Tears streamed freely, hands trembled as they touched scorched walls, and whispered words of gratitude reached her ears. Thank you for saving us," they said, voices breaking with emotion. Eliza nodded, offering tired smiles, her own eyes stinging. She had no words that could fully capture what she felt. The battle was over, but the emotional aftermath was profound. Soldiers approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a single human mind, body, and will standing against 35 armored tanks and emerging victorious. Officers took careful notes, recognizing the tactical genius, the bravery, and the sheer determination required for such a feat. They would report her actions to the highest levels, but for now, the focus was on survival, recovery, and care for those who had endured the battle. Eliza moved among the survivors, assisting where she could, her uniform torn, her hands blistered, her face streaked with soot and grime. She guided families to safer locations, helped load the wounded into makeshift shelters, and offered words of encouragement. Every step reminded her that victory had a price, and even in success, there was work to be done. The town had survived the storm, but it was fragile, and she would not allow complacency to take hold. As night fell, the valley was bathed in a muted glow of orange from distant fires and the fatting sun. Civilians lit candles, gathering in small clusters to mourn, celebrate, and begin the slow process of healing. Eliza stood on a small rise overlooking the valley, watching the interplay of light and shadow, fire and smoke. She felt the enormity of what had transpired, the narrow line between life and death, destruction and survival. 35 tanks had entered the valley, and yet, through courage, intellect, and unwavering determination, they had all been stopped. She allowed herself a moment to remember the moments of terror, the moments of decision, and the moments when she had felt her own mortality brush against her like a cold hand. Every trap she had set, every calculation she had made, every explosion she had triggered, it had all led to this moment of stillness, of survival. And yet, she knew that the valley, the town, and even her own life had been changed forever. A young boy approached her cautiously, eyes wide, holding a small, scorched toy soldier. "Did you really do it? Did you stop them?" he asked, voice trembling. Eliza knelt, meeting his gaze, exhaustion evident but pride restrained. "Yes," she said softly. "We stopped them. You're safe now." The boy's eyes filled with tears of relief, and he ran back to his family, clutching her words like a lifeline. The night deepened, stars emerging faintly through the haze of smoke and ash. The valley was quiet now, eerily so, the echoes of battle fading into memory. Eliza remained on the ridge, surveying the landscape she had fought so hard to protect. She could see the twisted metal, the scorched streets, and the faces of those she had saved. And in that quiet, she allowed herself a single, deep breath, feeling the weight of survival, the enormity of her actions, and the fleeting peace that followed unimaginable chaos. Somewhere in the distance, a small fire burned. Civilians gathered around it, sharing stories, comforting one another, beginning to rebuild their sense of normalcy. And though the night was dark, the valley had survived. Millersville had endured, thanks to a single woman who had stood alone against 35 tanks and refused to yield. Eliza finally lowered herself to the ground, exhaustion overwhelming every fiber of her being. She allowed her eyes to close for a moment, feeling the pulse of the town, the rhythm of survival, and the fragile promise of peace. The battle was over. The tanks were destroyed, the commander defeated, the valley intact. But even in the quiet aftermath, she knew this was more than victory. It was a testament to human will, courage, and resilience. One person, against impossible odds, had stood firm and changed the course of history for a town, a valley, and countless lives. And as the first stars fully emerged, shimmering through the lingering smoke, Captain Eliza Monroe rose to her feet. Her body was battered, her uniform torn, her face streaked with soot, but her spirit remained unbroken. Millersville had survived, and she had ensured it. The valley was silent, yet alive. A lone figure stood amidst the ruins, a living symbol of courage, determination, and hope. 35 tanks had attempted to crush the town, yet one human being had defied them all. And in that moment, as night settled over Millersville, it was clear. Heroes are not born, they are forged in fire, smoke, and the crucible of impossible odds. Captain Eliza Blaze Monroe had endured the impossible, and in doing so had ensured that Millersville would live to see another dawn. And that dawn, though distant and fragile, promised hope.